All right, so now that we're more familiar with some of the benefits and possible downsides of working with TypeScript, let's see how we can create and run our first TypeScript program. Now, the very first thing that you're going to want to do here is make sure that you have Node.js installed. And even if you have it installed from a while back, you're probably going to want to make sure that you at least have a recent version of Node.js. So if you don't already have Node.js, or if you're in need of an update, all you have to do to find this out, by the way, is open up a terminal, and I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code for this course just because, it's a very easy to use and straightforward IDE. And if you open up a terminal, which you can do in Visual Studio Code by going to Terminal, New Terminal, as I did here, you can find out what version of Node you have installed, if any, by typing node and then -- version. And as you can see, I currently have Node version 18.2. Now, if you see some sort of error saying that the command node wasn't found, then that means you probably don't have Node installed, or if it is installed, it's not set up correctly. So what I'm going to recommend you do in that case is go to nodejs.org and download the latest LTS version, right? The long-term support version, which you can do just by clicking on this button. And as you can see, even on my computer here, my version is a little bit behind. So I'm going to download this and I'm going to run the installer, which I'll do just by clicking open. And here we go. It's opened in my other monitor here. So let's just walk through this real quick. You're just going to want to agree to the licensing agreement, and it's going to tell you how much space it's going to take up on your computer. And you should just be able to click install. And it's going to ask me here for my password, and then it should run for a little while. And once it's done, you should be able to click close and move to trash. And back in your terminal, you may need to just open up a new terminal in order for any changes to take effect. I'm going to do that just by clicking this plus button, and I'll get rid of the old terminal here. So now if we run node -- version again, you should see that it has an up-to-date version. And if you happen to be using the Node Version Manager, NVM, you might need to manually switch this by doing NVM install and then the version of Node that you want to install, so 18.16.0. Okay, so anyway, now that you have Node installed, you're also going to want to make sure that you have a fairly up-to-date version of NPM, and you can check that out by saying NPM version. And you should see that you have something close to what I have here. It doesn't have to be exact, and if it's a higher version than mine, even better. Cool, so now that we've installed Node, we should be able to get started with our first TypeScript project. The first thing you're going to want to do here is install the TypeScript CLI, which is a command line tool that will help us do things like set up new TypeScript projects, compile our code, and other things that we'll see a little bit later on. So what you're going to want to do here is, in that same terminal, we'll run npm install -g, and we're going to type TypeScript after that. So this will globally install the TypeScript CLI into our local computer. And what you should be able to do now is run the command tsc -- version, and it should show you a version number, right? So this tsc command is one of the TypeScript commands that's included as part of that package that we just installed. All right, so now that we've installed TypeScript globally, the next thing that we're going to do is create a project. Now, there are a few different ways to create a new TypeScript project. There are certainly ways that you can generate an entire TypeScript project for yourself. But what we're going to do here is just start off dead simple by creating an empty directory and just adding some TypeScript files to it. All right, so TypeScript doesn't have to be complicated. What we're going to do here is in our terminal, we'll navigate to where we want to create our TypeScript project. What I'm going to do is say cd repos. And then inside here, and this is just a directory that I have, by the way. You might not even have this repos directory. So if you're curious what directories are in the current directory you're inside of in your terminal, you can always just type the ls command and it'll show you. All right, but once you're inside the directory that you want to create your TypeScript projects inside of, what we're going to do is create a new empty directory by saying make directory, and we'll call this something like my first TypeScript project. Okay? And now that we've created that, we can open that up in Visual Studio Code either by doing File Open Or if you have your terminal set up to do this, you can say code and then the name of that directory that we just created, and that'll open up a new Visual Studio Code window with that empty directory inside of it. Cool, so now that we have this empty directory for our TypeScript project, we're gonna create a new file inside of here, and we'll call this something like app.ts, all right? And that's the first thing to notice, is that TypeScript files actually end with a .ts extension instead of the .js extension that JavaScript files end in. So now that we've created this file, let's write our first few lines of TypeScript code. What we're going to do here is we're going to just say let message, and after that we're going to put a colon followed by the keyword string, right? And this is the first thing that you'll see that's different from regular JavaScript in TypeScript. And then after that, we'll just say equals, and then in quotes, you can either use double quotes, single quotes, whatever you want, just like in JavaScript. We're going to say hello from TypeScript. Okay, so this is our first variable declaration in TypeScript, and we'll go over the syntax here in a little bit more detail shortly. For now, though, just notice that this colon string thing is how we give a specific type to a variable. So now that we have this variable, we can just print it out to the console by saying console.log message. And if we save that, that will be our first TypeScript program. All right, so a few things to notice here. The first thing is, as I said, in TypeScript, we statically define the types of our variables, whereas in JavaScript, right, we would have been able to say something like let message equals hello. Right? And then if we wanted to change the type of that variable, we could say something like message equals 4, and that would be perfectly fine, right? JavaScript would allow us to do that. In TypeScript, however, because we've statically told TypeScript what type a variable should contain, we can no longer do that, right? We can't just say message equals and set it equal to some other type like true or 4 or whatever. So that's the first thing to know about TypeScript, and this is generally considered to be a benefit because, you know, when you're working with variables, especially in larger programs, it's really nice to know what type of data each of those variables is supposed to contain. And in the case of TypeScript, it's nice to know what type of data it's going to contain. All right, so that's the first thing I wanted to point out. The second thing is that even though we have this TypeScript program now, there are actually a few steps we have to go through before we can actually execute the code that it contains. So what we're going to need to do here is transpile this code, right? Transpile is sort of like compiling, except it's taking one programming language and turning it into another programming language instead of actually taking a programming language and turning it into some sort of computer code. Now, the way that we transpile a TypeScript program is by using that TypeScript command line tool that we installed earlier. So all we have to do in order to take this TypeScript file and turn it into an equivalent JavaScript file is run tsc and then the name of the file we want to transpile. So in our case, that's going to be app.ts. And if we hit enter here, what we're going to see is that it'll run for a second and you'll see this app.js file appear. And if we open this file up, what you'll see is that this is really the JavaScript equivalent, the JavaScript version of the TypeScript code that we wrote. So one question that you probably have right off the bat is, where did the static typing go, right? Right, from our point of view right now, the tsc command basically just took that static type out of our code altogether and completely ignored it. However, that static typing wasn't actually ignored by the TypeScript compiler, and you can actually see this if you go back to the app.ts file and try and do something illegal, right? So let's say that we want to do message equals 4 like I was showing you beforehand. Well, now if we try and run tsc app.ts, we're going to get an error, right? It actually tells us that we're not allowed to assign a type number to a variable that we've specifically said should only contain strings. And this is where the static typing is actually used in TypeScript. So in other words, TypeScript doesn't check the types of variables at runtime, it actually checks them at compile time. So when you write a larger TypeScript program and then transpile that to JavaScript, you'll know during that transpilation process if there are any type errors, right? TypeScript will tell you, and if there are any errors, then you'll have to go back and correct them and try and transpile it again. So anyway, that's just something to know about TypeScript because that can confuse a lot of people, especially people who are used to working with JavaScript where the types of variables aren't really even checked until runtime. So anyway, that's how to create and run our first TypeScript program. What you're going to want to do here is probably just remove that erroneous code and try compiling your code again. And as a matter of fact, we haven't actually run our transpiled JavaScript program yet. Let's just do that by running node app.js. And sure enough, we see that it says hello from TypeScript. So in other words, in order to run a TypeScript program, we have to transpile it or compile it to JavaScript, and then we simply run the resulting JavaScript code. All right, so that's how to create and run our first TypeScript program. The next thing that we're going to take a look at are some of the specifics of TypeScript syntax.